this course today and tomorrow is really the kind of core of what I'm passionate about. And it's this idea of discovering what is kingdom business. And the core of that, and I'm going to sort of unpack that today, is this idea that business can be your ministry. Now, this comes from, for me personally, someone who, as a young man in my 20s, was passionate to serve the Lord, but really grappling with, well, where, Lord? How? How are you going to use me? And really struggling to see beyond quite a narrow understanding of what a full Christian life looks like. That narrow understanding was limited in a sense to full-time work in a church, whether it be a pastor or in a missionary or something quite specific. And that's very deeply ingrained in our Christian culture globally. It goes back right back to the sort of 11th century, the idea that you couldn't be a full Christian if you weren't effectively in a monastery. People out in the world couldn't really achieve the higher levels of spirituality. And that's deeply kind of ingrained somewhere. I don't know of anyone who's ever taught it. I don't know of anyone who ever promotes that. But somewhere deep down, a lot of Christians find that a difficult reconciliation. They want to do all they can with their lives for the Lord, and then that creates quite a narrow understanding of what that looks like. And that leaves 95 to 99% of Christians feeling slightly underrated and feeling like they're not quite delivering their full potential for God. Anyway, for me, it took about 15 years for God to kind of begin to reveal to me why I was correct to have followed what I believe to be his calling into business. So I sensed a call into business, and I sensed God speaking to me about going into business and going into, in my case, the business of architecture, right from the beginning. But it was only about 15 years later that I actually understood that this was okay. And I stopped feeling a sense of, guilt would be too strong a word, but a sense of inadequacy, a sense of, why am I doing this? What is really the purpose of this? And so a lot of what this course is about is trying to unpack and share with others, I hope, something which will help you really take hold of God's purpose for your life. Now, that may not be in business. It may well be that as we're talking about all of this, it just affirms in you that you need to be doing something else. That's fine. But what's really important is that whatever it is God's called you to, that you enter into that and that you're fruitful in it. And for me, for many, many people, it's going to be in the context of the business world. Most people are involved in some form of business. Now, you may work for a business, or you may be the owner of the business, but the reality is you are out there in that world of enterprise. And whether it be farming, manufacturing, sales, working in a shop, you're still involved in what we would think of as business. Positive understanding of what the Bible has to say about business. God has just revealed a whole load of things to me, which I'm enjoying sharing. And sometimes this is about changing the filter. And the Bible's an amazing book. And depending on what filter you kind of apply to your reading of the Bible, God will teach you different things. So if you want to know about parenting, and you want to understand about how to be a good parent and bring up children in the ways of the Lord, I can guarantee you large chunks of the Bible will speak to you. And you'll find really powerful things about parenting. If you want to discover about personal character and personal development, the Bible will teach you a great deal about that. What I'm discovering is if you want to know a great deal about business, the Bible will teach you a great deal about that as well. And so we're going to look at some of those examples. I've already said we're going to look at how business can be a ministry, and then we're going to look at these 10 guiding principles for godly business, what I've sort of called a kind of code of conduct for Christians in business. So the vision, in a sense, what this is part of for me, we'll look at, and then we'll go through the Bible on business, and we're going to spend this morning the main chunk of the time looking at what the Bible has to say about business up to lunchtime. This afternoon we'll look at business as a ministry and look at how that might take shape. Then we'll do the Kingdom Business Code tomorrow morning, and then the afternoon we'll be doing Leaving a Legacy, which is this sense of how can we make sure that we take something from this, and that this isn't just a 3 days sat in a room, but actually becomes something fruitful in all of our lives. So in terms of the vision, just very short, just to set out where this has come from. I guess my heart, the kind of core of this, my objective, is to see godly people at the heart of the economy, effective in the ministry of business. It's particularly, I think in my own country, this is particularly kind of powerful, because when my country went through its industrial revolution and the economy went from a subsistence economy, farming predominantly, to a kind of industrial economy, a significant number of the most powerful, influential businesses in my country at that time were all founded by passionate Christians. People who took their understanding of Scripture and applied it directly to their business life. And those companies remain most of the biggest, most successful, well-known companies in our country 150 years later, which is phenomenal legacy. Now, many of those companies are no longer run by the family. They're no longer run by Christians, but most of them still retain the core DNA of the Christian values that were put in them 150 years ago by their founders. And it's because of those people that we have things like paid holidays at work. They invented that idea. People didn't have the paid holiday. They just worked. And then all of a sudden, someone comes along and says, we should pay people. They created housing for their workers. Not just cheap housing, the cheapest they could provide, but high quality housing. Housing that's of such a high quality that even today, 150 years later, it's the most high quality, most expensive, most respected housing in our country. Still yet to be bettered in terms of quality, which is phenomenal. So they created environments for people to live and prosper and enjoy a good quality of life. And yes, they prospered in the process themselves. But we'll look at one or two of them in more detail as we go through this. So we've been here before. Certainly my economy, we've been here before. And somewhere along the last 100 and something years, we've sort of lost our way. And there are very few prominent Christian business people at the heart of the economy actively speaking into that economy and taking leadership. There are many Christians in business, but so many of them don't seem to have grasped that just because you're a Christian and you're in business doesn't mean you're in kingdom business. And so many people think that I'm a Christian, I go to church on a Sunday, I'm an active Christian, I happen to run a company and I'm a leader in my company. What's the problem here? But what I've realised is there's a very big difference between just being a Christian and being a Christian who really understands what God's purpose for you is and what God's teaching is on a particular subject. So there's an element of, and this is because I've discovered that myself. You know, I was a Christian in business 15 years ago, but I wasn't a Christian doing kingdom business 15 years ago. So my kind of strategy, if you like, is to equip the church, to equip the saints. So the reason I've been spending a lot of time talking to pastors is because pastors have the responsibility, as we looked at yesterday in Ephesians 4, to equip the saints for works of service. So I've been focusing on equipping pastors for that task. But the objective here is to equip the saints so that they can effectively engage in the ministry of business. So that's you guys. Want to build working relationships between church and business. You know, an interesting question is, when was the last time your pastor or a member of the leadership of your church laid hands on you because you were going to work on Monday? Yeah? Now, we lay hands on people when we send them into the mission field. Well, I would suggest if you have any heart for evangelism, you're going into a mission field every Monday morning. But we somehow miss that. We don't see that as somehow worthy of the laying on of hands and prayer into those people's lives. So, if nothing else, I've been trying to build respect between business leaders and church leaders. And I've loved it when I get a group of pastors, 20 or 30 pastors and 20 or 30 business leaders, and they're all praying for each other, laying hands on each other, because they're both leaders of people of influence in their society, and they're both people who can bring substantial cultural change for the kingdom of God. To raise up a generation of godly entrepreneurs. So I'm really wanting young, not necessarily all young, but people in the church who've got a gift that's suited to business and got a passion for it, to have that validated and to be free to know that they can pursue that calling with all of the blessing of God and his people. And many don't feel that, so they don't ever go into it. So I am really passionate to see a generation of godly entrepreneurs raised up who will take that leadership. And this is a long game. I don't expect to see these people in positions of influence for another 30 years. If we're lucky, maybe 15 years. But people don't get to a position of influence in business for at least 15 years. It's a long game. And they don't generate the cultural impact for probably another 30, 40 years. But if 30, 40 years from now, there could be a generation of godly entrepreneurs, that would be an amazing thing. And And then to see God's kingdom built through kingdom business. So the absolute primary objective here is to see not just people understanding this and embarking on this journey, but seeing people fruitful in it. And that requires ongoing discipleship, accountability, and an understanding of what it is to be fruitful and what that looks like. So far, I've been spending quite a lot of time teaching on the principles of business with ministry. That's what we're doing here today. That, if you like, is kind of step one in my tactics. Training on the principles of kingdom business. So training is perhaps different to just introducing. So today we're kind of doing quite a lot of introducing. I would say training is more complex, takes longer. Training is probably on the job. Training involves more like mentoring and feedback. And then support that encourages a legacy. That is that kind of continuation into evidence of fruitfulness. And I think for me, the exciting thing is, one of the reasons I'm keen that there's an opportunity for sort of staying in contact is I'd like to hear a testimony 3 or 4 years from now. It'd be lovely to hear a testimony of something that one of you has gone on to do, that you can say, this is kingdom fruit coming out of my business life.